The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Copper Creek, a small frontier town nestled between rolling hills and endless prairie. 12-year-old Samuel Sam McCarthy swept the front porch of Henderson's General Store, his worn boots stirring up clouds of red dust with each stroke of the broom. The September air carried the scent of sagebrush and the distant sound of cattle lowing in the corrals. Sam paused, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. His clothes, hand-me-downs from various townspeople, hung loose on his thin frame. 3 years had passed since cholera took his parents and baby sister, leaving him to survive on the charity of reluctant neighbors and odd jobs around town. "Boy, you missed a spot near the door," barked Mr. Henderson from inside the store, his voice carrying the usual tone of irritation whenever he addressed Sam. "Yes, sir," Sam replied quietly, returning to his sweeping. He'd learned long ago that talking back only made things worse. A familiar bark echoed from behind the store, and Sam's face immediately brightened. "Rusty!" he called out, abandoning the broom as his golden retriever Mix bounded around the corner. The dog's tail wagged furiously, and for a moment Sam forgot about his troubles. Rusty was his only true family now, a loyal companion who'd chosen to stay with Sam even when food was scarce. The dog had shown up shortly after Sam's family died, as if sensing the boy's desperate need for companionship. "There you are, boy," Sam said, kneeling to scratch behind Rusty's ears. "I was wondering where you wandered off to this morning." But as Sam's hands moved through Rusty's fur, he felt something wet and sticky. His fingers came away red with blood. "What happened to you?" Sam's voice filled with concern as he examined the dog more carefully. There were several shallow cuts along Rusty's side and legs, as if he'd been running through thorny brush. More troubling, there was a deeper gash on his left hind leg that was still bleeding. Henderson emerged from the store, scowling at the scene. "That mangy mutt better not be bleeding on my clean porch." "He's hurt, Mr. Henderson. You need to finish your work. That's what you need to do, and keep that animal away from my store." Sam's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Come on, Rusty, let's get you cleaned up." After finishing his morning chores and earning his daily 50 cents, Sam led the limping dog to the water trough behind the store, using his own shirt to gently clean the wounds. The cuts weren't life-threatening, but they were concerning. Rusty was smart and careful. It wasn't like him to get injured like this. "Where were you, boy? What happened?" Rusty whined softly and looked toward the hills east of town, his ears perked and alert. The dog took a few steps in that direction, then looked back at Sam, as if trying to communicate something urgent. "You want to show me something?" Sam asked, studying his dog's behavior. Rusty barked once and limped toward the edge of town, stopping frequently to look back at Sam. Sam decided to follow Rusty's lead. The dog seemed determined to guide him somewhere, despite his injuries. They walked along the dusty main street, passing the saloon where piano music drifted out even in the early afternoon, and the modest church where Emma Sullivan, the 16-year-old daughter of the town's doctor, was reading on the front steps. Emma was one of the few people in Copper Creek who had ever shown Sam genuine kindness. When he'd been sick with fever the previous winter, she'd brought him soup and medicine without being asked. "Morning, Emma," Sam said, approaching with Rusty limping beside him. She looked up and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Sam. How's Rusty doing?" "I noticed he was hurt." "He's better, thanks. Got tangled up in some thorny brush up in the hills." Emma studied Sam's face with the perceptive look she'd inherited from her father. "You look worried. Is everything all right?" "Just concerned about Rusty," Sam said, though there was more to it than that. As they reached the outskirts of town, Rusty became more animated despite his limp. He led Sam to a narrow dirt road that wound toward Eagle's Peak, the highest hill in the area. There, clearly visible in the dust, was a trail of dried blood drops. Sam's heart raced. "This is where you came from?" The trail led up a steep, rocky path toward Eagle's Peak. Local legends spoke of the hill being cursed, though Sam had always figured those were just stories. Now, staring at the blood trail disappearing into the scrub oak and juniper trees, he felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. Taking a deep breath, Sam adjusted his worn hat and started up the trail after Rusty. "All right, boy. Let's see what you found." The path was steeper than it looked from town, winding through dense brush and over loose rocks. The blood trail continued, sometimes disappearing on rocky sections, but always reappearing in patches of dirt. As they climbed higher, Sam could see all of Copper Creek spread out below. The town looked smaller from here, almost fragile against the vast expanse of prairie stretching to the horizon. The afternoon sun was starting to sink lower when they heard it. The sound of metal striking rock, rhythmic and deliberate. Someone was digging. Sam crouched low, motioning for Rusty to stay quiet. Through the brush, he could see movement near the summit. Two figures worked with shovels near what looked like an old mining claim, their voices carrying down the hill. "Should have been more careful with that dog," one voice said, gravelly and harsh. "Stupid animal came out of nowhere," replied another. "At least it ran off before it could cause real trouble." Sam's blood ran cold. These men had hurt Rusty. Moving carefully through the scrub oak, Sam crept closer until he could see the men clearly. One was tall and thin with a scraggly beard, wearing a black coat despite the heat. The other was shorter and stockier, with arms like tree trunks. Between them, a hole had been dug about 4 feet deep. Scattered around the site were old mining tools and pieces of rotted wooden crates. But most interesting was what lay beside their excavation, several canvas bags that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins when the wind moved them. "Think there's more down there, Jake?" asked the stocky one. "Has to be, Pete. The map showed 3 caches, and this is only the first one we've found." Sam's heart pounded. A treasure map? Hidden money? But as he shifted to get a better look, his foot slipped on loose gravel. The sound echoed down the hillside, and both men immediately stopped digging. "What was that?" Jake's voice was sharp with suspicion. "Probably just a rabbit," Pete replied. But he was already reaching for a rifle, leaning against a nearby rock. Sam held his breath, pressing himself flat against the ground behind a large boulder. After what felt like an eternity, the men returned to their digging, but Sam could tell they remained alert. As carefully as possible, Sam began backing away from the excavation site. He needed to get back to town and tell someone what he'd seen. But who would believe him, and who could be trusted with information about hidden treasure? The sun was setting as Sam and Rusty finally made it back to town. Sam's mind raced with possibilities and dangers. He'd stumbled onto something big, but he was just a 12-year-old orphan with no resources and no allies. That night, lying in the small room behind Henderson's store, Sam stared at the ceiling and planned his next move. For the first time in 3 years, he felt like he had a real chance at changing his destiny. But he also knew that Jake and Pete wouldn't give up their find easily. Tomorrow, he would have to decide whether to tell someone about what he'd discovered or find a way to investigate further on his own. The next morning, Sam made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of going to Sheriff Morrison, who was usually too drunk by noon to be much help, he went to see Dr. Sullivan. Emma's father was one of the few adults in town who had ever treated Sam with genuine respect. Dr. Sullivan listened intently as Sam told his story, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Sam finished, the doctor sat back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. "These men you saw, did they mention anything about land ownership or property rights?" Sam shook his head. "Just something about a map showing 3 caches of treasure." "I see." Dr. Sullivan stood and moved to his bookshelf, pulling out a thick volume of territorial law. "Sam, there's something you should know. Yesterday, some well-dressed men from back east arrived in town. They've been asking questions about property deeds and land titles around Eagle's Peak." A chill ran down Sam's spine. "Do you think they're connected to Jake and Pete?" "It's possible. Land speculators often work with treasure hunters and claim jumpers to find ways to dispute existing property rights." Dr. Sullivan turned to face Sam directly. If there really is treasure hidden on Eagle's Peak, and if these men can prove some kind of historical claim to the land, they might be able to force property sales throughout the valley. The implications were staggering. Most families in Copper Creek had put their life savings into their homes and businesses. If their property rights were disputed, they could lose everything. "What should we do?" Sam asked. "We need to find out exactly what's buried on that hill before Jake and his associates can use it against the community." Dr. Sullivan closed the law book and looked at Sam seriously. "Would you be willing to show me where you saw them digging?" That afternoon, Sam led Dr. Sullivan, Emma, and Thomas Chen, an old prospector who'd agreed to help, up the winding trail to Eagle's Peak. The excavation site looked different in daylight, more organized and professional than Sam had first realized. The men were gone, but their digging had continued. The hole was now nearly 6 feet deep, and scattered around the site were fragments of old documents and pieces of metal that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Thomas examined the excavation with an expert eye. "This isn't random treasure hunting," he said grimly. "They know exactly what they're looking for." Dr. Sullivan picked up one of the document fragments, a piece of paper with faded writing that looked official. "Emma, bring the magnifying glass from my bag. I want to see if we can read any of this." As Emma worked to piece together the document fragments, Sam noticed something the treasure hunters had missed. Partially hidden under a pile of rocks was a small metal box, tarnished with age, but still intact. "Dr. Sullivan," Sam called out, "look at this." Using tools from Thomas's prospecting kit, they carefully opened the corroded lock. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were several items that made everyone stop and stare. A stack of old $20 gold pieces, a folded document that looked like a deed, and a small leather-bound journal. The deed was for land rights to a section of the valley that included most of what was now Copper Creek. It was dated 1847 and signed by someone named Marcus Whitman. The journal told an incredible story. According to the entries, Marcus Whitman had been a settler who'd established a trading post in the valley before most of the current town existed. He'd made agreements with local Native American tribes and accumulated significant wealth through fair trading practices. But as tensions grew between settlers and native peoples, Whitman had hidden his wealth and important documents in 3 locations around Eagle's Peak, fearing they would be stolen during conflicts. The final entry, dated 1855, revealed that Whitman had died of pneumonia before he could retrieve his hidden caches. He'd left behind a map and instructions, hoping someone trustworthy would eventually find them and use the wealth to help the community he'd tried to build. "This isn't just treasure," Emma said, her voice filled with awe. "This is the founding legacy of Copper Creek itself." Thomas nodded. "And if these documents are authentic, they establish legal precedent for the entire community. Those land speculators can't dispute titles that are based on Whitman's original grants." But their discovery celebration was cut short by the sound of approaching voices. Jake and Pete were returning, and they were moving fast. "The hole's been disturbed." Jake's voice carried up the hill, sharp with anger. "Someone's been here," Pete confirmed. "Look at these fresh footprints." Dr. Sullivan quickly gathered the documents and gold coins. "There's another path down the backside of the hill," he whispered. "Thomas, can you guide us?" They moved as quietly as possible through the brush. But Jake and Pete were experienced trackers. The chase was brief but tense, ending only when they reached the old abandoned mill where Thomas had been living. "We need to get these documents authenticated quickly," Dr. Sullivan said as they caught their breath inside the mill. "If Jake and his associates realize what we've found, they'll try to discredit the evidence or steal it outright." That evening, Dr. Sullivan called an emergency meeting at the church. Nearly every property owner in town attended, along with many others who simply wanted to understand what was happening to their community. Sam found himself standing before the entire town. telling the story of how following Rusty's blood trail had led to the discovery of Marcus Whitman's hidden legacy. When he finished, the church was silent for a long moment. Then Henderson, of all people, stood up. "I've seen those Eastern men around town," the shopkeeper said. "They've been asking questions about property deeds and land titles. Didn't think much of it at the time, but now—" "They offered to buy my farm yesterday," added a voice from the back, "for half what it's worth. Said there might be legal complications with the title if I didn't sell quick." Sheriff Morrison, looking more sober than Sam had seen him in months, rose from his seat. "If there are men in my town threatening property owners and conducting illegal excavations, that's something I need to address directly." The community response was swift and decisive. A committee was formed to examine Whitman's documents and determine their legal validity. Thomas Chen volunteered his mining expertise to help locate and properly excavate the remaining treasure caches. Most importantly, the town united against the land speculation scheme. When Jake, Pete, and their Eastern associates arrived the next morning with official-looking papers and threats about invalid land titles, they found themselves facing not frightened individual property owners, but an entire community armed with authentic historical documents and a very alert sheriff. The confrontation was brief. Faced with Marcus Whitman's original land grants, documented proof of their illegal excavations, and a united community that refused to be intimidated, the speculators left Copper Creek that very afternoon. The investigation that followed revealed that similar scams had been attempted in other frontier towns, often successfully. But Copper Creek's quick response and authentic documentation had protected the entire community. In the weeks that followed, the remaining treasure caches were located and properly excavated. The gold coins were used to establish a community fund for town improvements, better roads, a proper school, and assistance for residents facing hardships. But the most important discovery was Marcus Whitman's treaty with local Native American tribes, which established formal agreements for shared land use and mutual respect. Working with tribal representatives, the community honored these historical commitments, creating educational and trading relationships that benefited everyone. Sam found himself appointed as the community fund's first administrator, with Emma Sullivan as his assistant. It was a responsibility that both terrified and thrilled him. "Are you sure about this?" Sam asked Dr. Sullivan when the appointment was announced. "I'm just a kid." Dr. Sullivan smiled. "Sam, you found a treasure and your first thought was how it could help the entire community. That's exactly the kind of person we want managing these resources." 1 year later, Sam stood at the summit of Eagle's Peak, looking out over the valley that had become his true home. Copper Creek had grown and prospered. The school, built with treasure funds, was full of children from both settler and Native American families. The improved roads had brought new businesses and opportunities. Emma joined him at the summit, now 17 and planning to attend medical school back east. Rusty dozed in the afternoon sunshine, his injuries long healed, his role in transforming the community secure in local legend. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Rusty hadn't gotten hurt that day?" Emma asked. Sam scratched behind Rusty's ears. "I used to think it was just luck. But now I think maybe Rusty understood something I didn't. That sometimes you have to get hurt protecting what matters before you can really help heal it." Down in the valley, children played in the schoolyard. Farmers worked their fields, and smoke rose from the chimneys of homes where families prepared their evening meals. The town that had once felt like a collection of strangers had become a true community. "What are your plans now?" Emma asked. "You could go anywhere, do anything." Sam was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about something Marcus Whitman wrote in his journal. He said the real treasure wasn't the gold he was hiding. It was the community he was trying to build, a place where everyone looks out for everyone else. And you think that work isn't finished yet? I know it isn't. What we've accomplished here is just the beginning. There are other towns, other communities that could benefit from what we've learned." As the sun began to set behind the western mountains, Sam felt a deep sense of contentment mixed with anticipation. The orphan boy who had once swept floors for scraps had become a young man with resources, connections, and most importantly, a clear sense of purpose. Rusty stirred from his nap and looked toward the trail leading down to town, his tail wagging slowly. It was time to head home. "Come on, boy," Sam said, standing and brushing dust from his clothes. "Time to see what tomorrow brings." The orphan who had followed his injured dog up a dangerous hill had discovered more than treasure. He'd found his destiny as a community leader and protector, and in a growing frontier territory full of towns facing similar challenges, that destiny was just beginning to unfold. The end.